The howling winds across the plains of Silvermount, Colorado carried a peculiar kind of judgment that spring of 1874, whispering tales of Eleanor James' scarred hands long before she appeared in town, as if her tragedy had somehow become the territory's favorite ghost story. Eleanor stood at the counter of Silvermount's general store, her breath catching in her throat as she extended payment for her purchases. She tried to keep her hands hidden, as always, but Mrs. Porter's eyes darted down, catching sight of the twisted flesh and puckered scars that covered Eleanor's once smooth palms and fingers. Land sakes. Mrs. Porter gasped, making no attempt to hide her disgust as she recoiled from taking the coins. "Use a handkerchief next time, Mrs. James. Some folks might catch something." Eleanor swallowed hard, her cheeks burning with humiliation. "Burns don't spread, Mrs. Porter." "I've told you that before." "Well, they're still unsightly. Think of the children." The storekeeper's wife nodded toward a young boy who stared openly at Eleanor's hands. 2 years as a widow in Silvermount had taught Eleanor that cruelty came easily to those who feared difference. At 32, she had grown accustomed to such treatment, though it never stung any less. The fire that had claimed her husband Thomas had left her with these hands that had desperately tried to pull him from the burning barn, hands that had failed. "I'll leave the money here," Eleanor said quietly, placing the coins on the counter's edge before gathering her supplies. The weight of flour, beans, coffee, and sugar strained against her scarred grip, but she refused to show weakness. Outside, she struggled to arrange her purchases in the small wagon she'd brought to town. The spring air carried the scent of new grass and distant rain, a pleasant contrast to the stifling atmosphere of judgment inside the store. "Need some help with those, madam." The voice came from behind her, deep and warm like summer earth. Eleanor turned to see a tall man with sun-browned skin and eyes the color of a clear mountain lake. His black Stetson cast a shadow over features that seemed carved from the Colorado landscape itself, strong, weathered, yet somehow gentle. "I can manage," she replied automatically, the words a defense mechanism built over months of pitying glances. The stranger nodded respectfully but didn't move away. "Name's Vincent Wade, just rode into town yesterday, looking for work." Eleanor sized him up. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, his boots scuffed from honest labor. Nothing about him suggested the danger of a drifter or the entitlement of a cattle baron. "There's not much work in Silvermount these days," she said, finally succeeding in loading her supplies. "The silver played out last year." Vincent Wade's smile revealed a small dimple in his right cheek. "I heard the Campbell Ranch is hiring hands. Thought I'd try my luck." Eleanor's stomach tightened. "Old man Campbell doesn't hire just anyone. I've got references, been working cattle since I was 15. He gestured to her wagon. "You headed out of town." Roads can be dangerous for a lady alone. The unwelcome memory of 3 men who'd followed her last month surfaced in Eleanor's mind. They'd only wanted to torment her about her hands, calling her witch and demon-touched, but the encounter had left her shaken. "I live just outside town." The James homestead. Recognition flickered in Vincent's eyes, but unlike others, no disgust or morbid curiosity followed. "Would you mind if I walked alongside? I'm headed that direction anyway, and I could use the company." Something about his straightforward manner disarmed her usual caution. "Suit yourself, Mr. Wade." As they traveled the dirt road leading away from Silvermount, Eleanor found herself stealing glances at the tall cowboy. He walked with an easy stride, occasionally commenting on the landscape or asking polite questions about the area. Nothing in his manner suggested he was waiting for an opportunity to mock her hands, which she kept firmly gripped on the wagon's reins. "Beautiful country," Vincent observed as they crested a small rise that revealed the sprawling valley below. "A man could build a good life here." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Yes, my husband thought so too." Vincent was quiet for a moment. "I heard about the fire. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. James." She nodded, unsure how to respond to sympathy without the usual undertone of morbid curiosity. "Do you manage the homestead alone?" he asked. "I have help during planting and harvest. The rest of the time I make do." Pride crept into her voice. Against all expectations, she'd kept the small farm operational after Thomas's death. 20 acres of wheat, a vegetable garden, 6 chickens, 2 milk cows, and 1 stubborn mule named Bartholomew. "That's impressive," Vincent said, and the simple sincerity in his voice made her cheeks warm. When they reached the fork in the road where Eleanor would continue to her homestead, and Vincent would presumably head toward the Campbell ranch, she found herself reluctant to part ways with this strangely respectful stranger. "The Campbell place is another 4 miles, she said, nodding toward the western path. "If you're looking for work, best to get there before sundown. Old man Campbell likes punctuality." Vincent touched the brim of his hat. "Thank you for the advice, Mrs. James." He hesitated, then added, "If you ever need help around your place, I'd be happy to lend a hand. Payment or no." Eleanor's instinct was to refuse. She'd grown wary of charity that came with hidden costs, but something in Vincent Wade's clear gaze suggested no ulterior motive. "I'll keep that in mind, Mr. Wade." As she watched him walk away, Eleanor wondered if she'd see the cowboy again. Silvermount had a way of chewing up and spitting out newcomers, especially those with kind eyes and gentle manners. 3 days later, Eleanor was struggling with her temperamental water pump when a familiar voice called from the road. "Afternoon, Mrs. James." Vincent Wade sat atop a sturdy chestnut gelding, his black Stetson pushed back on his head. In the clear daylight, Eleanor noticed a thin scar running along his jawline, like a silver thread against his tanned skin. "Mr. Wade," she acknowledged, straightening up and wiping her brow with her sleeve, careful to keep her scarred hands low. "Did old man Campbell hire you?" "He did." Vincent dismounted with fluid grace. "Wanted to ride by and thank you for your advice. Mind if I take a look at that pump?" Before Eleanor could protest, he was kneeling beside the rusted mechanism, his strong hands working the lever with practiced ease. "Just needed priming," he said after a moment, water gushing forth from the spout. "And this bolt here is loose. Got a wrench?" Eleanor fetched her husband's old toolbox from the barn, watching as Vincent made quick work of the repair. When he finally stood, there was a smudge of rust on his cheek that made him look boyish despite his 30-odd years. "Thank you," she said, fighting the urge to hand him a cloth for his face. Such a gesture seemed too familiar. "Happy to help." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Campbell's keeping us busy, but I ride this way most evenings. Anything else needs fixing, just let me know." Eleanor wanted to say she didn't need charity, that she'd managed just fine these past 2 years, but what came out instead was, "The barn door's been sticking." Vincent's smile widened. "I'll bring my tools tomorrow if that suits." It became a pattern over the following weeks. Vincent would ride by after his work at the Campbell Ranch, staying an hour or sometimes 2, fixing what needed repair around Eleanor's homestead. A loose board on the porch, a leaky roof section, the chicken coop door that wouldn't latch properly. Eleanor found herself looking forward to his visits, preparing coffee, and sometimes a slice of fresh baked bread or pie for his arrival. They would sit on her porch afterward, watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky in impossible colors while making careful conversation. Vincent never asked about her hands, and Eleanor never volunteered the story. But one evening in late April, as she handed him a cup of coffee, her grip faltered. The hot liquid splashed across her scarred skin, and she couldn't suppress a small cry of pain. "Let me see," Vincent said, setting down his cup and reaching for her hands before she could hide them. Eleanor froze as his calloused fingers gently cradled her scarred palms. No one had willingly touched her hands since the fire. "We should cool this," he said matter-of-factly, leading her to the water pump. His touch was careful but not hesitant as he held her hands under the cool water. "It doesn't hurt much," Eleanor managed to say, though it wasn't the burn that had stolen her breath but the casual tenderness of his touch. Vincent's blue eyes met hers. "These are old scars." It wasn't a question, but Eleanor nodded anyway. "From the fire, 2 years ago." He continued to hold her hands, his thumbs moving gently over the ridged tissue. "You tried to save him." The simple truth of his words unlocked something in Eleanor's chest. "I couldn't reach him. The barn roof collapsed and her voice broke. I was too late." Vincent said nothing for a long moment, just held her hands in the stream of cool water. Then, to Eleanor's astonishment, he raised her right hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her scarred palm. "These hands," he said softly, "are beautiful, Eleanor. They show more courage than most men I've known." Eleanor couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The simple gesture had shattered 2 years of carefully constructed walls. "I should go," Vincent said, seemingly unaware of the earthquake he'd caused within her. "Campbell expects us at first light tomorrow. We're moving cattle to the north pasture." Eleanor nodded mutely, watching him mount his horse and ride away, the last rays of sunset catching in his dark hair. Only when he was out of sight did she allow herself to trace the spot on her palm where his lips had touched, wondering if she'd imagined the entire interaction. She hadn't. Vincent returned the next evening, and though neither mentioned what had happened, something had shifted between them. Their conversations flowed more easily, punctuated by comfortable silences and, occasionally, laughter. Eleanor learned that Vincent had grown up in Texas, the son of a rancher who'd lost everything in the war. He'd been drifting north for years, working ranches from the Rio Grande to the Rockies, saving money to someday buy land of his own. He spoke of his dreams with a quiet conviction that made Eleanor believe in them too. In turn, she told him about her life before Silvermount, growing up in Philadelphia, meeting Thomas at a church social, their journey west in search of silver, and instead finding contentment in the simple rhythms of their small farm. "I never thought I'd stay after he died," she admitted one evening as they sat shelling peas on the porch. "But this land, it gets in your blood." Vincent nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Some places claim you, become part of who you are." May brought the planting season, and Eleanor found herself facing the daunting task of preparing her fields. Vincent began arriving at dawn on Sundays, his one day free from Campbell's employ, to help with the heaviest work. Other ranch hands might have expected payment or at least a hot meal, but Vincent seemed content with coffee and conversation. Word of their friendship spread through Silvermount like wildfire, spawning rumors that ranged from pitying to scandalous. Eleanor felt the stares when she went to town, heard the whispers cut short when she entered the general store. "Heard you've got company out at your place," Mrs. Porter said one afternoon, her tone suggesting she'd bitten into something sour. "That new hand from Campbell's." Eleanor placed her items on the counter. "Mr. Wade has been kind enough to help with some repairs." Mrs. Porter's thin lips pressed together. "Kind is he, must be, to touch those hands of yours." Heat flashed through Eleanor's body, not embarrassment this time, but anger. "Mr. Wade is a gentleman, which is more than I can say for some in this town." The whispers followed her out of the store, but for once, Eleanor didn't care. Let them talk. Vincent Wade saw value in her scarred hands, and somehow that mattered more than all of Silvermount's judgment. The first summer rain came on a Sunday in early June. Vincent had arrived at dawn as usual, helping Eleanor plant the last section of her vegetable garden. By mid-morning, dark clouds gathered over the mountains, and the air grew heavy with the promise of a downpour. "We should get inside," Vincent said, glancing at the sky as the first fat drops began to fall. They barely made it to the porch when the heavens opened. Rain pounded the roof and turned the yard into a sea of mud. Eleanor laughed at their narrow escape, then caught herself, realizing it was the first time she'd laughed freely in Vincent's presence. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't decipher, raindrops clinging to his eyelashes and dampening his shirt. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Your laugh," he said simply. "It's nice." Something warm unfurled in Eleanor's chest. "It's been a while since I've had reason to use it." Vincent took a step closer, and Eleanor was acutely aware of how alone they were, the rain creating a curtain around her homestead that blocked out the rest of the world. "Eleanor," he said her name like a prayer. "I've been wanting to ask." A crash of thunder interrupted him, followed by the panicked bleating of Eleanor's goats. Their pen gate must have blown open in the sudden wind. "The animals," she gasped, already moving toward the steps. Vincent caught her arm. "I'll go. You stay dry." Before she could protest, he was dashing through the downpour toward the frantic animals. Eleanor watched from the porch as he corralled the goats back into their pen, securing the gate with a length of rope from his pocket. By the time he returned, he was soaked to the skin, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. Eleanor rushed inside to fetch a towel, returning to find Vincent removing his muddy boots on the porch. "You'll catch your death," she scolded, handing him the towel. "Come inside and dry by the fire." It was the first time Vincent had been invited into her home beyond the porch, and Eleanor felt a strange nervousness as he stepped through the door. The cabin was small but tidy, a combined kitchen and living area with a stone fireplace, a curtained alcove that served as her bedroom, and a small loft above where Thomas had planned to put children's beds someday. Vincent stood dripping on the plank floor, looking too large for the modest space. "I should get you some dry clothes," Eleanor said, then flushed at the impropriety of the suggestion. "I mean, I have some of Thomas's things still. They might fit." Vincent's expression softened at her discomfort. "Thank you, I'd be grateful." Eleanor found one of her husband's shirts and a pair of trousers in the cedar chest where she'd stored his belongings. The clothes would be a bit short on Vincent's taller frame, but they were dry. "You can change behind the curtain," she said, handing him the bundle and pointedly looking away. While Vincent changed, Eleanor busied herself building up the fire and putting on a pot of coffee. The rain continued to drum on the roof, creating a cozy cocoon of sound around the cabin. "Much better," Vincent said, emerging from behind the curtain. Thomas's blue cotton shirt strained slightly across his broader shoulders, and the trousers ended above his ankles, but he looked comfortable. He'd rolled up the wet clothes into a neat bundle. "I'll hang those by the fire to dry," Eleanor offered, taking the sodden garments from him. As their fingers brushed, a jolt of awareness passed between them. They sat before the fire with cups of hot coffee, listening to the storm rage outside. The unusual intimacy of the situation being confined together in her small home, Vincent wearing her dead husband's clothes should have made Eleanor uncomfortable. Instead, she felt a curious sense of rightness, as if the universe had conspired to bring them to this moment. "You were about to ask me something," Eleanor said suddenly, remembering their interrupted conversation on the porch. Before the storm, Vincent's eyes reflected the dancing flames. "It can wait. I'd like to hear it now." He set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. "I've been offered a position, foreman at a ranch near Denver. Good pay, a house of my own on the property." Eleanor's heart sank. "Congratulations, when do you leave?" "I haven't accepted yet." Vincent reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her scarred hands in his. "I wanted to ask if you'd consider coming with me." Eleanor stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "As my wife," Vincent clarified, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I know it's sudden, and I know you have your life here, but people would talk," Eleanor interrupted, her mind racing. "They already do, about these." She flexed her scarred fingers in his grasp. Vincent's expression hardened. "I don't give a damn what people say." He lifted her hands and pressed his lips to each scarred palm in turn. "These hands saved my life, Eleanor." She blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" 2 years ago, I was riding through these parts, got caught in a storm, saw a barn on fire. I heard someone shouting for help." Vincent's eyes never left hers. "I found a man trapped under a fallen beam. Together, we managed to get him out, but the roof was coming down. He told me to run, said his wife was coming with help." Eleanor's breath caught. "Thomas, you helped Thomas?" Vincent nodded. "We almost made it out." Then another beam fell, hit me here. He touched the scar along his jawline, knocked me unconscious. When I came to, I was outside the barn. The man was gone, and a woman with burned hands was screaming his name. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes as the pieces fell into place. "You pulled him out and he went back for you. And you tried to go in after him." Vincent's voice was gentle. "I was too dazed to stop you. By the time I got to my feet, the whole roof had collapsed." "Why didn't you tell me?" Eleanor whispered. "At first, I wasn't sure it was you. I'd only seen you for a moment that night, and you were." He hesitated. "You were in such pain. Then when I realized I didn't know how to tell you, I wasn't sure if knowing would bring you comfort or more grief." Eleanor's mind reeled with this new information. All this time, she'd blamed herself for not being strong enough, fast enough to save Thomas. Now she learned he had died a hero, saving this man who had come back into her life. "You came to Silvermount for me. she said, understanding dawning. Vincent's expression was solemn. I never forgot your hands, Eleanor, how they reached into fire for someone you loved. I wanted to know the woman who had that kind of courage. Outside, the storm had begun to subside, the rain softening to a gentle patter against the roof. Inside, Eleanor felt as though her world had shifted on its axis. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Say you'll think about Denver, Vincent replied. About us. Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, her scarred palms cradled in his strong, steady ones. For 2 years, she'd believed these hands represented her greatest failure. Now, Vincent was asking her to see them as he did as symbols of courage and sacrifice, worthy of love. I'll think about it, she promised. The rain stopped completely by late afternoon, leaving behind puddles that reflected the emerging sun. Vincent's clothes had dried by the fire, and he changed back into them, returning Thomas's garments neatly folded. I should get back to the ranch, he said, though his reluctance was evident. Campbell will be wondering where I've gone. Eleanor walked him to the door, 1,000 unspoken words hovering between them. As Vincent reached for his hat, she impulsively caught his arm. Sunday, she said. Come for dinner on Sunday and I'll give you my answer about Denver. The smile that lit his face warmed her to her toes. I'll be here. The week that followed was the longest of Eleanor's life. She went about her chores mechanically, her mind constantly circling back to Vincent's revelation and proposal. Each night, she lay awake, weighing her options with the pragmatism that had kept her alive these past 2 years. The homestead represented security, familiarity, and the last physical connection to Thomas. Denver meant uncertainty, starting over, and the frightening prospect of opening her heart again. Yet when she imagined leaving, it wasn't the land or the house she would miss, but the memories they contained. On Thursday, Eleanor went to town for supplies, steeling herself for the usual whispers and stares. To her surprise, Mrs. Porter was almost civil, commenting on the fine weather and asking after Eleanor's chickens as if they regularly engaged in such pleasantries. Heard Campbell's new foreman visits your place regular, the woman said finally, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Mr. Wade has been kind enough to help with some repairs, Eleanor replied, the same answer she'd given before. Mrs. Porter leaned across the counter. My nephew works at Campbell's too. Says Wade turned down the foreman position at the Denver ranch, said he had reasons to stay in Silvermount. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. Is that so, MMM? Interesting, isn't it? Mrs. Porter's eyes gleamed with unasked questions. Eleanor paid for her purchases and left, her mind whirling. Vincent had turned down the position. Why hadn't he told her? What did it mean for his proposal? Sunday dawned clear and bright. Eleanor rose at first light, an unfamiliar nervousness fluttering in her stomach. She spent the morning preparing a special dinner: roast chicken, fresh bread, early vegetables from her garden, and an apple pie cooling on the windowsill. By midday, she'd changed her dress 3 times, finally settling on a blue calico that Thomas had always said matched her eyes. She brushed her hair until it shone, twisting it into a knot at the nape of her neck, and even pinched her cheeks for color, a vanity she hadn't indulged in years. When Vincent's familiar figure appeared on the road at 3 o'clock, Eleanor's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he would hear it. He'd clearly made an effort as well, wearing a clean white shirt and new suspenders, his dark hair slicked back neatly beneath his Stetson. You look beautiful, he said simply when she opened the door. Eleanor felt a blush rise to her cheeks. Thank you. Come in. Dinner's almost ready. They ate at her small table, the conversation flowing easily between them despite the decision that hung in the air. Vincent complimented her cooking, told her stories about the cattle drive he'd been on that week, and made her laugh with his impression of Old Man Campbell's perpetual scowl. Only when the pie was reduced to crumbs and the coffee cups emptied did Vincent finally broach the subject they'd been avoiding. I guess you've heard I turned down the Denver position, he said, watching her face carefully. Eleanor nodded. Mrs. Porter mentioned it. Her nephew works at Campbell's. News travels fast. Vincent's smile was rueful. I should have told you myself. Why did you turn it down? She asked, needing to hear it from him. Vincent reached across the table and took her hands in his, a gesture that had become natural between them. "Because I realized I didn't want to go to Denver if it meant leaving you behind, and I didn't want to pressure you into leaving a place you love. So what are you proposing now?" Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper. "Campbell's offered me a position as his right-hand man. Less pay than Denver, but—" Vincent's thumb traced gentle circles on her scarred palm. "I could build us a house near town, or we could stay here if you prefer. I just want to be where you are, Eleanor." Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes. "I thought my answer would be difficult. I've been agonizing all week, weighing Denver against Silvermount. And," Vincent's voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, "and then I realized something." Eleanor turned her hands to grip his firmly. "Home isn't a place, it's where you feel safe, accepted, loved." Hope bloomed in Vincent's eyes. "What are you saying, Eleanor?" "I'm saying yes," she smiled through her tears. "Yes to being your wife. Yes to building a life together, whether it's here or Denver or anywhere else." Vincent was around the table in an instant, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. His kiss was gentle at first, then deeper as Eleanor responded, her scarred hands coming up to frame his face. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Vincent pressed his forehead to hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the first time I saw you struggling with your purchases in town." Eleanor laughed softly. "Even with these hands, especially with these hands." Vincent kissed each palm again, the gesture that had first broken through her walls. "These brave, beautiful hands that show me every day what real courage looks like." Outside, the Colorado sun was setting in a blaze of pink and gold, painting the small homestead in warm light. Inside, Eleanor James stood in the circle of Vincent Wade's arms, her scarred hands held tenderly in his, and knew that after 2 years of darkness, she had finally found her way home. 3 months later, on a perfect September morning, Eleanor and Vincent were married in the small church in Silvermount. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, including Mrs. Porter, who sniffled loudly during the vows and later pressed a hand-embroidered tablecloth into Eleanor's scarred hands with genuine good wishes. They made their home on Eleanor's homestead, expanding the cabin and the farm with Vincent's steady hands working alongside hers. When their first child was born the following summer, a daughter with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit, Eleanor wrapped her scarred hands around the tiny, perfect form and felt only gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. And each night, Vincent Wade would take his wife's hands in his, press his lips to the scars that had once been a source of shame, and remind her that love sees beauty where others see only brokenness.